Yeah, it's incredible to hear firsthand these stories. I don't think many of us have access. Certainly, I haven't in my life had access to that. It's quite a privilege and quite a time to be hearing it when we see it playing out again in real time. You said that prior to the Holocaust in Europe, that Zionism was seen as an extreme ideology, but that very much on the fringes, but that this changed after 1945. And you've spoken about visiting your family. I understand that was in the 60s in Israel when you
late 60s, 70s, yeah.
when you experienced this shock of how extreme they'd become in their Zionist ideology. And I feel hearing you speak, you know, you are supremely qualified. I think so many of us are. The experience of the genocide in Gaza has taken us to places that we can't almost quite reach conceptually and emotionally and in language, and I think you're supremely qualified to grasp the horror viscerally. You know it yourself personally. What is your relationship to, if you don't mind me asking, your family now who support Zionism and perhaps Jewish Zionists more broadly? I think you've become certainly a UK figure, but perhaps even an international figure with your iconic sign and the stand that you're so courageously taking. What is your relationship now to that?
I think this this genocide in Gaza and particularly divides families, and my sister is also in the UK, a younger sister. She was 2 years old during the Holocaust, and obviously has no memories of it. But she also qualified as a doctor and became a psychoanalyst and practiced in this country. She married another architect. I am an architect, and came over legally to this country as his wife. And her politics is different from mine, and I find that very painful and difficult. In fact, we eventually came to an agreement that we don't talk about politics, because within a few words we are at each other's throats. She asked, when I mention about what I can see and what I hear and the facts of the genocide, she would say, well, what is the source of your information? And you know, she believes that, I hope not by now, but until recently, believed that the BBC was a reliable source and neutral. And there is two sides to each story, all this kind of thing, and I can't stand it. So we agreed not to talk about it, because I just say, well, you're just simply not well informed, and there's no point discussing it any further. So that's the immediate experience. Some of those relations in Israel, particularly Haifa, they have, unfortunately, the aunts and the cousin have all passed away by now, died. So I don't have connection anymore. The one distant relation used to work for the Israeli police as a psychiatrist, and I can guess his views. So I don't have contact with him. My cousin, who was older than me, and died just a few weeks ago, actually, and stayed in Hungary, I was in constant contact with, who was a great critic of Viktor Orban and his regime and Hungary's direction of travel towards near fascism. I could talk about this and she was a constant source of this type of information. But strangely enough, couldn't talk about Palestine, because again she was broadly Zionist in her approach to Palestine. And again, she's somebody who during the Holocaust was extremely brave, part of this rescue group. She was older, she was actually working in some charity, saving people, etc. And yet, she took the wrong side, as far as I'm concerned, the wrong side of history on the Israel-Palestine issue. I can't explain it again. And eventually, first I argued with her, but I find that Zionists are hopeless targets for argument. Once they're Zionists, you won't move them. And so I stopped. At the last demo, we are sending on the side, as you know, proving that not all Jews support Israel, quite the opposite. And a provocateur came up to us and said, "Shame on you, why are you doing this," etc. And I said to him, "Okay, I have just one question. Do you support the genocide?" And he said, "What genocide?" So I said, "Okay, end of discussion. And I don't want to talk to you. Goodbye." You can't. If what is happening, the horrors of it, cannot move you to the right side, you're lost, you're hopeless. Save your energy.
I'm actually going to just ask one more question and then open it up to the floor.
Before I might die.
Hello? Yeah, and then we can open it up to Q&A. So, as you mentioned, you've been called into an obligatory interview. I don't think you can say much about it. This Friday, 21st of March, and I'm sure many of us are going to be there. We know it's 2 o'clock, Charing Cross Police Station.
More like 3.
Oh, more like 3 o'clock, Charing Cross Police Station this Friday.
Well, 2:30 to 3.
The rally is at 2.
The microphone might be packing up.
Quick work. It's quick work.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so like, I mean, again, we're in this extraordinary situation where Jewish people and Holocaust survivors are being targeted by the British authorities. Many of us here this evening have also been targeted for our pro-Palestinian activism, and it would be great to hear from you about what you think about the current climate in the UK, but internationally, more broadly in the West, where we're seeing this very intentional and cynical conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and also pro-Palestinian and support for prescribed organisations. And perhaps you could say a little bit as well about your relationship to the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, and your resignation from the party. That's quite a lot, but I said it was my last question, so I had to get quite a lot in. And then we'll open it up to the floor for Q&A. Thank you.
Hi. Can you hear me? Is this working? I start with the last, because I was a very enthusiastic supporter of Corbyn and when he appeared and his campaign, and as soon as momentum was established, I joined it, and I joined the Camden branch. I went to the meeting, the homecoming meeting of Jeremy Corbyn after the end of his campaign, when he came back to Islington, home ground, and there was an evening meeting the night before the official announcement that he won, but we knew that he won by then. And this was one of the best political experiences I had, because it was a huge rally packed full of enthusiastic young supporters. And I was looking around and then thinking, somehow this bunch has to be kept together. And momentum was born within days, exactly on those grounds, to support Jeremy Corbyn. And as we know later, the leadership of momentum rather betrayed it in some ways. But I then joined quickly after the local Camden branch of momentum. But it was looking different, whereas this homecoming rally was all young and enthusiastic. Looking around the momentum Camden, they were all retired people on the whole. So it's quite a different demography. Anyway, but they were still intelligent people, some of them. And by that time, the false allegation of rampant anti-Semitism within the Labour Party started up. And we realized, the momentum realized, that was all a fake thing for a particular political purpose, as a weapon against Jeremy Corbyn, basically, and the left. So they already worded a pretty good resolution to be presented the following day to GC meetings. There were those who had anything to do with the Labour Party know what a GC meeting is, which is a General Council meeting. It sounds kind of exclusive. It's quite a big meeting with lots of delegates from branches. And usually it used to sit once a month and addressed by the MP of the constituency. This is the kind of highest body of the constituency, still to do with the membership. So there was going to be such a meeting the following day, and the leaders of the branch momentum were looking around at who should present our motion, saying that we don't have any anti-Semitism in our constituency to speak of. And they looked at me and said, well, you are a Holocaust survivor, you will present it. And this was the first time I spoke in public. I more or less had to say yes, you know, I couldn't deny it. Okay, I said I will. When it came to the meeting, what I didn't realize, I had to speak after the leader of the council, Georgia Gould, now an MP somewhere else, who was a Zionist. And following her speech was Keir Starmer speaking, again in the opposite direction. He said, I just come back from a shadow cabinet meeting where we managed to come, with great difficulty, but we managed to come to a common platform that we must root out this dreadful anti-Semitism, no messing around, etc., etc. And we arrived at this common platform, which meant Jeremy Corbyn as well, supposedly. And I had to follow that. And I said, well, I'm sorry, speaking from personal experience, there isn't any in our constituency. And I have never experienced it, although I am pretty sensitive to it with my background, and I haven't seen anybody else experiencing it. So I don't think we have any of any significance. This was not popular with the then current leadership. And they tried to water it down with amendments, all kinds of pacifying amendments. And it's a technicality I didn't know before. It was entirely up to me personally to accept or reject amendments, because I presented the motion, and I rejected all the amendments. It was then put to the vote and it was the last vote momentum won in the Labour Party and in our neck of the woods anyway. By that time, I did know Keir Starmer personally, because he not only was part of our constituency as an MP by then, but also a member of my branch. And I once or twice went door knocking with him and others, you know. So he knew me personally. And I went up to him after the meeting and said, well, look, sorry, Keir, you know, I had to be honest to my personal experience. Sorry if it was opposite of yours. And he was furious, you know. He said, oh, you divided the party. This coming from him, it's really interesting. and stormed off. That was the end of my relationship with Jeremy Corbyn, with Keir Starmer. So that was interesting. What was the other?
Well, from that to where we are today.
Okay. I was through friends, personally introduced as somebody who knew about, had experience of the Hungarian Holocaust, to Tony Greenstein, who was a kind of anti-Zionist expert by then. And I had an evening with him. This is way before the events later. And the only thing, he was already proud. He said, I am the first person who was thrown out by the Labour Party for anti-Semitism. He's a son of a rabbi, yes. So that was interesting. And we had an evening with him and gave him the details I knew and the history I knew. And years later, when it came to Holocaust Memorial Day, he invited me to be part of the panel of a meeting organized by the SLN, Socialist Labour Network, or something like that. And be a part of the panel and talk about my direct experience of Holocaust. And I said, yes, of course, certainly. And then he put this out as a trailer. The panel members will be, and I was there as well. The following day almost, I got a letter from the regional Labour Party saying, be on notice that if you going to appear on this panel of this organization which is proscribed, you will be subject to a disciplinary investigation, which is, I knew, meant being thrown out. Nobody survives Labour Party disciplinary investigation. You know, everybody. There is not even a proper appeal, let alone surviving. In those days, anyway. I don't know. I doubt if it's much different now. And so I received this letter, and by return of post, I resigned with a fairly strongly worded letter, which went viral. And I sort of ended the letter saying that, well, I reasserted that I had not had this experience of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party and consider it not real and a false thing. And I ended the letter saying that in the future, historians will look back on this and make the comment that unfortunately it was the Labour Party who imported from the US McCarthyism into this country. That was the... this was then picked up by Ken Loach and other people, and the rest is history. I had one interview after another following this, starting with Middle East Eye, where Peter Obon and David Hurst interviewed me jointly, and so it went on. Double Down News, Al Jazeera, etc., etc., and it never stopped since.
Right, should we open up to the audience?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I must just say how much I admire what you are doing here, because it's an enormous thing to do, to have a continuous presence. I have been occasionally involved with the iGen protest at Swiss Cottage, which Mona knows a lot about. and that's known to be a dangerous place. A number of friends have been arrested there. But that's once a week. But to have it as a continuous thing, it's something I admire enormously, and I think it's a great contribution. Thank you very much.
So I'll just say one more thing, and then we'll go to Q&A. I just so that you know, this camp is inspired by the 24/7 picket that was held outside the South African embassy in the 80s, from 86 to 90, just in Trafalgar Square, calling for the release of Nelson Mandela. And they stayed there as well for 4 years, day and night, all seasons. And so we're very much trying to emulate that commitment
I
to.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing.
So opening up the floor. So Satish, do you want to?
Thanks first.
Great. What a great evening. I really enjoyed your stories, and enjoyed listening to the way you related to your stories and your experiences. And I couldn't help but, actually, every description that you were giving, I couldn't help but remember the video clips and the images that we've seen in Gaza this last year. So many thanks for that. The parallels are just clear and evident. I have two questions for you. One is, at the very start of your talk, you said something about the assimilation that the Jewish population had to go through. And I wonder, are there any parallels between that assimilation and the Judification of Palestine in any way, in your view? And my other question was a little bit more personal. What made you become an anti-Zionist?
I think it's very much a generational thing about Zionism and the secular character of the Jewish population, at least of the educated Jewish population that I knew in Budapest, the friends and relations of my family. My grandparents and their generations were very keen, observant Jews. My father, my grandfather on my father's side, whom I never met because he died relatively young, was a cantor in a suburb, a poor suburb of Budapest, synagogue. And my father turned completely against his childhood experience and upbringing. And on my mother's side, the grandfather there was a very keen, observant Jew. And again, my mother's generation sort of rebelled against it. And they actually joined a so-called agnostic circle. There was a kind of social group who called themselves agnostics, but certainly not observant Jews. And by the time it reached my generation, we were completely non-religious. With one proviso I will come back to. But so the interwar generation, the dominant generation of my parents and their friends and similar, were all by that time non-observant, and therefore assimilation was natural to them. That they wanted to be, they were brought up in the Hungarian culture, as was I, and my cultural heroes were all Hungarian, Hungarian poetry, Hungarian music, Hungarian history, etc. And hardly any Jewish religious influence. In fact, I am a bit ashamed of this, but it's a fact that I first learned about Jewish holidays when I arrived in the UK from my non-Jewish friends. I had no idea about the Jewish holidays. So the assimilation was a kind of natural process, in effect. It wasn't in spite of or some kind of Zionist influence or in the teeth of Zionist influence. We were aware of Zionists as a remote, strange, extremist, freakish caste. And there were very few of them. Now, after the war, a lot of Hungarian Jews were bitter about the Hungarian fascist experience towards the end. And many of them left the country, but hardly any of them chose Palestine. They went to US if they could, or Norway, or almost anywhere. A branch of my family went to Australia, and so on. They were very proud of being European, and they wanted cultures very similar to European, and they considered Palestine sort of the beginnings of Asia, and they weren't interested going there. And there was no religious reason for that, because, as I said, they weren't, overwhelmingly, they weren't religious. My grandmother was. Now, there is another influence. Because of the discrimination towards the end of the 30s, beginning of the war period, against Jews, but particularly at the beginning of the war, a number of Jews deliberately chose the escape route, as they saw it, of converting to Christianity, without meaning it, just formally, so that they were protected to some degree. And that worked at the beginning of the war, but not for long. Now, it so happens that a branch of my family, particularly a very talented uncle, who was director of the Hungarian theater in Cluj, now it's called Cluj-Napoca, then under Hungary, Kolozsvár. It was really the capital of Transylvania, unofficial capital of Transylvania. And the Hungarian theater there was an important cultural institution. And he was a director of the theater. And he was a writer as well, and part of a Hungarian cultural circle propagated by some extremely rich Hungarian aristocrats. It's a famous cultural circle. He also converted, but in his case it was, although some in the family doubted it, but it was genuine. And one or two of my aunts definitely converted, and under his influence, this very talented man's influence, became genuine Calvinists. So that's complicated the family story. As I mentioned, my extreme Zionist aunt, who ended up in Haifa, was a very keen Zionist, while still being a Calvinist Christian. The first time I heard about Bibi Netanyahu was from her. She was one of his early fan clubs. You know, it's amazing. I didn't know what that meant at that time. I do now. And so that complicated things. And right after the war, when I was about 8, 9 years old, I fell under the spell of this Calvinist branch myself. And I had a brief experience of religiosity of a Christian Calvinist variety. And I remember it as a very pleasant experience while I had it, which wasn't too long lasting, but it was nice to know that I'm being protected and loved from above, etc., etc. And so that was my inroads. But some members of my family, for example, my cousin, who was also caught up in these homes and behaved very bravely, actually, an older cousin who just died a few weeks ago, 95 she was. She remained a completely convinced, observant Calvinist to the end of her days. And so was her mother. Very strange.
Questions. I wonder if we should take maybe 2 or